Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1259, Pristine Soul. In the morning, the island shook again. Sunny opened his eyes and reached through the shadow sense, checking in on Saint. Since the taciturn knight was standing calmly above the fissure, he relaxed and yawned with great satisfaction. He felt incredibly refreshed. The dark island was in one piece, and nothing was pouncing to kill them. Life was great. He sat up, leaned on the slope of the fissure, then rubbed his eyes and looked around. Nephi's was already up, doing light stretches a few meters away. Sunny watched her for a few moments, then forced himself to avert his gaze. The sound of her even, yet fragile voice resounding from the darkness still echoed in his ears. Nef's second nightmare was different from his own, just like her first nightmare had been. She had not battled immortal saints to free an imprisoned daemon from divine chains. Instead, she had tried to save a small group of pitiful and forlorn creatures, only to watch them all die. Nephi's had been the last one standing on the forgotten shore, and after traveling alone through the purgatory of the nightmare desert, she built a tiny community amidst the cold darkness, only to watch it be destroyed. She had been so strong, but the nightmare made her weak. She had been so proud, but the nightmare made her beg for mercy on her knees. He wasn't sure he could imagine how painful it was for her to sacrifice the two things that were at the core of her sense of self. Yes, Nef had not slain impossibly powerful enemies with her radiant sword in the nightmare. But, for her, wielding a sword against an overwhelming foe was not something to be feared. Maybe that was why the spell always tried to break her in some other, more cruel way. Sunny looked down at the weathered surface of the black rock. The spell. I wonder. How had the spell appraised Nef's performance in the second nightmare? Sunny was not sure, but he had an inkling that the appraisal was exceedingly high. If his theory was right, that was, and the appraisal depended on how much the challenger had changed the flow of fate. In that regard, he suspected that what Nephi's had done was miraculous. She had wanted to change the fates of the forsaken creatures living in the darkness at the bottom of the underworld. In that task, she failed. However, she had succeeded in changing something else. She changed the harrowing creature that had come from the darkness. Had the creature been compelled by her words? By her pleas? Or had it been infected by the same yearning that Nef had ignited in the hearts of the forsaken? Had the creature of darkness been poisoned by a hint of an indescribable longing? Had it learned to long for light? If the heart of an abyssal being powerful enough to be a horror in the underworld had been changed, even ever so slightly, then Sunny could not really imagine what ripples that change could cause in the great tapestry of fate. So, the spell could have appraised Nef's performance as glorious. But that was not important. Because Nephi's herself did not see it that way. The spell and its carriers had different criteria for success, after all. The spell might be satisfied with Nef's performance, but Nef obviously saw it as a bitter, irredeemable failure. The tone of her voice yesterday had said it all. Continuing to stare at the ground, Sunny sighed. After returning to the waking world, Nephi seemed much more mellow than before. But her resolve to kill the sovereigns and destroy the spell also seemed much more stalwart than before. Now that he knew the truth, many things about her past words and actions made sense. Gods. Just what am I going to do with her? Sunny glanced at Nephi's, who was oblivious to his thoughts, with a complicated expression. There was one more thing he had to consider. The description of Nef's aspect, Lightbringer. You are a creature of light that was banished and doomed to exist in the darkness. You bring radiance and warmth to wherever you go, but with it comes indescribable longing. Wasn't it very similar to the trial the spell had presented her with in the second nightmare? The ascended ability she had unlocked as a result was called longing, too. Longing, yearning, desire. Wish. Was the inexhaustible longing to destroy the spell that burned like fire in Nef's heart so powerful that it made her soul incorruptible? He had pondered about this ability of hers before, but now, Sunny saw it in a new light. It had seemed like a rather useless power to have, outside of very rare circumstances. Like facing the skinwalker. However, if that ability made Nephi's immune to the corruption, then wasn't it actually the most broken and unbelievably preposterous ability he had ever heard about? After all, even Weaver had to sever their arm when it got infected with the corruption. Not only was the great and terrible demon of fate not immune to corruption, he or she was even powerless in front of it. Just what was Nephi's, exactly? And, more importantly, what was she to him? The subject of his thoughts, meanwhile, finished her stretching exercises, pulled the fastened strap of her white tunic back to her pale shoulder, and looked around. Nephi smiled. "You're up." Sunny smiled back. "Yeah. How are you feeling?" It seemed as though she had recovered from opening the old wounds to tell him about her second nightmare yesterday. However, a moment later, Neff's smiling face darkened a little. She sighed. "I wanted to make breakfast. But we have no food left." Sunny tilted his head, then looked down. They were literally sitting on a mountain of meat. But with the azure serpent circling the carcass of the black turtle, diving into the river to procure even a little bit of it was an utterly lethal task. He shook his head with resignation. "We'll solve that problem when the time comes." Nephi's nodded, lingered for a moment, then pointed to the sleeping bag. "See? I didn't rip it." Sunny stared at her, trying to determine whether she was being serious or playing a joke on him. These days, it was getting hard to tell. Which bastard is being such a bad influence on my straight-laced and awkward Neff? I'm going to bash their teeth in. He remained silent for a few moments, then grinned. "Good. Because, you know, you still owe me for that projector." Chapter 1260, Leisure Cruise. Time flowed lazily. Both literally and figuratively. The current of the great river was pulling the corpse of the black turtle into the past, and several days passed in a strange, but pleasant idleness. The 7 suns rose and fell, drowning in the shimmering waters. The sky was like a dreamlike painting of lilac, azure, crimson, and jet black. The ancient serpent continued to circle the dark island, slowly consuming the bleeding meat of the great monster it had killed, and watching Sunny and Nephi's enjoy their unexpected respite. The two of them were spending their time leisurely. Feeling the need to rest and recuperate after the nightmarish gauntlet of the White Desert, they were not in a hurry to strain themselves too much. They slept peacefully through the nights, rising when warm sunlight flowed into the narrow fissure, and spent most of the days together. Sometimes, they would lay on the soft moss side by side and look at the sky in comfortable silence. Sometimes, they would train, sparring with each other until sweat covered their bodies. Sometimes, they would talk, discussing their experiences in the past year and various pieces of knowledge they had picked up along the way. They also spent some time apart. Nephi's was busy practicing her swordsmanship, often requesting Saint to aid her as a training partner. After sending her and his shadow off, Sunny would get busy with his own endeavors. He spent a lot of time studying the strange and hauntingly complex weave of the key of the estuary. This memory was a great mystery that had to be solved. Even after showing it to Nephi's, Sunny had not a single inkling of what it was supposed to do, and where it had come from. So, he settled for the slow approach of meticulously examining each and every thread of its somber tapestry. Depending on luck, this task could take him many months to complete, but there was no harm in starting early. Once his head started to ache from studying the black weave, Sunny would sit silently near the slopes of the island and watch the azure serpent prowl. He would close his eyes and sense the great beast's shadow. He would try to memorize its every scale, scar, and movement. Even though their situation was peaceful right now, he knew that the peace would not last indefinitely. The chances were that they would have to battle the abomination eventually. And so, Sunny wanted to glean its essence and commit it to his memory. Training his swordsmanship with Nephi's, studying the estuary key, observing the azure serpent, and resting idly. These were the things that filled his days. Of course, other things were happening on the dark island, as well. Imp was still busy devouring the bands of tarnished silver that encased the black turtle's body. His progress was slow, but the gluttonous goblin seemed beyond himself with delight. His scrawny figure could often be seen sprawled on the black rocks, utterly engorged. The sin of solace was still there, following Sunny like a jaded wraith. Its litany of snide comments and contemptuous remarks never lessened, slowly driving him mad. Sunny endured as best as he could, and luckily, the spirit of the cursed sword was not nearly as talkative as it had been before. Nevertheless, the apparition put him in many awkward situations with Nephi's. Nightmare was slowly subjugating new dreams into his unseen army. Almost every night, the counter of the dream curse would go up by at least 1 or 2. The source of these defeated nightmares were, of course, Sunny and Nephi's. It seemed that their minds were still haunted by the events of the past. Or maybe it was just the nature of the tomb of Ariel. Despite its breathtaking facade, it was a land worthy of its architect. A land of dread. It was also as desolate and empty as it was beautiful. Every day, Sunny and Nephi's would study the northern horizon, hoping to see the signs of land, or anything at all, far in the distance. But each time, all that met them was an endless expanse of flowing water. Their hunger slowly grew. Although masters were much more resilient than mundane humans, they were still the same. They needed sustenance to survive, just like any human would. Their bodies were still strong, but they would start to wither before too long. Before that happened, Sunny and Nephi's were going to have to find a way to harvest some of the black turtle's meat. The azure serpent raised its head from the water every time it devoured more, as if to mock them. Ah. I'm hungry. Sunny was sitting on a luxurious wooden chair, which was positioned near the slopes of the black turtle's carapace, facing north. His shadows surrounded him, lazily sprawled on the black rocks and enjoying the dreamlike vista of the great river. Only the naughty one had wandered off to enjoy the view of Nephi's training instead. Dismissing the estuary key, Sunny rubbed his temples and stretched his legs. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't recognize any of these weave elements. Not even their vague purpose. The more I look at it, the more sure I am that it won't be created by me. Whoever had created the key of the estuary was a far greater sorcerer than Sunny was, or could ever dream to be. At least that was how it seemed. All right. That's enough for today. The old snake should be showing its ugly mug any minute now. I really hope that it's as tired of staring at me as I am tired of staring at it. Sunny glanced at the wide patch of bloody water surrounding the shell of the great turtle in anticipation, lingered for a few moments, and then frowned. Something was wrong with that picture. He stared at the water for a while, his scowl deepening. Then, Sunny slowly raised his eyes and looked at the sky. His pupils widened slightly. There, in the boundless blue expanse, far away, a black dot had appeared at some point.